out front tonight, the breaking news, the kind of generals Hitler had. An 11th hour bombshell report from the Atlantic Jeffrey Goldberg, quoting Trump touting the loyalty of Hitler's generals and reporting that Trump complained about picking up the tab for a fallen U.S. soldier's funeral, calling her an effing Mexican. All right, well, let's start with Hitler's generals. Goldberg reporting that he asked Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, about claims that Trump once asked him, quote, "Why can't you be like the German generals?" So Goldberg then writes, well, he told me that when Trump raised the subject of German generals, Kelly responded by asking, "Do you mean Bismarck's generals?" He went on, I know he didn't know who Bismarck was or about the Franco-Prussian War. I said, "Do you mean the Kaiser's generals? Surely you cannot mean Hitler's generals." And he said, yeah, Hitler's generals. And the Atlantic goes on to cite then two more sources who were at the Trump White House. They claimed that they heard Trump say, quote, "I need the kind of generals that Hitler had, people who were totally loyal to him that follow orders." Now, tonight, a Trump spokesman shutting down that reporting, insisting that Trump never said this. But there's more in this Atlantic reporting from Jeffrey Goldberg, who also says tonight that Trump was outraged after learning the cost of a fallen U.S. soldier's funeral, which he had offered to pay for personally. Army Private Vanessa Julian was murdered by a fellow soldier at Fort Hood in April 2020. Now, according to The Atlantic, months later, in December, Trump reportedly asked his advisors in a meeting, quote, "Did they bill us for the funeral?" Because he had offered to pay for it. And then he continues, according to the reporting, saying, "What did it cost?" Now, according to attendees and to contemporaneous notes of a meeting taken by a participant, an aide answered, "Yes, we received a bill. The funeral cost $60,000. Trump became angry. It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican. Now, again, I'm reading here the entire part from The Atlantic. Now, the Trump campaign denies Trump said this entire exchange, and it is important to note that the sister of Vanessa Guillen tonight, fighting back against The Atlantic's reporting, she said to the publication, "Wow, I don't appreciate how you are exploiting my sister's death for politics, hurtful and disrespectful to the important changes she made for service members. President Donald Trump did nothing but show respect to my family and Vanessa. In fact, I voted for President Trump today." Jeff Zeleny is out front live in Detroit, where President Obama is set to take the stage at a Harris rally shortly. But Jeff, obviously a report like this, it's coming out now. It is coming out right before the election. That is what those involved who were sharing the information clearly wanted. Is the Trump campaign worried about this new reporting from The Atlantic coming at this 11th hour?
Well, Aaron, as former President Donald Trump is taking the stage in North Carolina tonight, his advisors, of course, are looking at this very carefully, but they are pushing back against this report. They're saying it is false. He never said it. And as we take a step back and look at the bigger picture here, it is hard to imagine any single report, any single anecdote, any bit of information about what Donald Trump said in office would change many or any minds in this election. We are 2 weeks before Election Day, and minds are hardened, views are settled. However, there are still those voters on the margins that the Harris campaign is trying to reach out to, voters that Liz Cheney was talking to yesterday here in Michigan, trying to reach out to them to sort of disqualify the president. Some people who may not be sold on Vice President Harris, or they may not prefer her as a top candidate, but they are still at the middle of this. I am told that former President Barack Obama is not likely to bring this up here tonight. Why? Because he wants to fire up the Democratic base. He wants to encourage them to vote early for Vice President Kamala Harris. We got a preview of what he was saying earlier tonight, just a couple hours ago in Wisconsin. Early voting started there. And he said, look, for anyone who has any nostalgia about the Trump economy, that was my economy. He went on to say that Trump inherited a very strong economy and then really just delivered a litany of belittling and mocking descriptions of the former president. But as it comes to comments about Hitler's generals or the military, I do not believe that will be front and center in this conversation tonight. This is all about firing up the base. This is a base election. It's why Eminem, the rapper, is making a very rare appearance here in his hometown of Detroit. He'll be introducing former President Obama, I'm told. But Aaron, it's just one more reminder, even though we have 2 weeks before the election, 16 million people have voted, there are still new pieces of information, and on the margins, that certainly can matter. But don't look for the Harris campaign, at least tonight, to lean into it too strongly.
All right.
Aaron?
Well, thank you very much, Jeff Zeleny, in such important context. Let's start here with a panel. But Margaret, let me start with you. Trump's reported comments on Hitler, and an interesting, Jeff's view, right, that in firing up the base and in people's minds being hardened, what impact does something like this have? But the campaign is nonetheless pushing back. They don't want this to be something that takes off. They're saying it's absolutely false. So you end up in a story here where it appears it's John Kelly versus Trump.
Yeah, look, if you have followed every twist and turn of the things that are reported to have been said in the White House to Trump's top advisors over many years, this new report is simultaneously chilling, outlandish, and totally believable because it tracks with what we have come to know about Donald Trump as somebody who deeply cares about power and authority and has become this sort of demagogic figure that adores dictators and authoritarians and complete yes men, and yet never really achieved that. This is the adoration for Putin, the adoration for Orban, the adoration for every dictator or authoritarian who he met and sometimes really kowtowed to. It seems believable. On the other hand, the people that we need to win now, if you're Kamala Harris, and I say we as somebody who is a Republican who is for Harris, are low propensity voters, low information voters, where these twists and turns are not what they are going to vote over. This is about the couch, right? It's about the term is they're trying to get voters off the couch. If you are not voting and you're only tuning in and it is 2 weeks from today, a comment that Trump made off the record or in private about Hitler isn't going to get you to the voting booth.
So the question is, what does it do to, well, perhaps Republicans like yourself who have not fully decided what to do? Right? I mean, I guess that's the question mark. If something like this is going to matter. Well, you've decided. But people who are like you, who, in the sense that they are Republicans who
sort of Nikki Haley voters who happen to say,
Yes. So, Mark Lauder, let me ask you about them, and I'll read some of what Jeffrey Goldberg writes in his article about this conversation with John Kelly, and just elaborate a little bit more. So, this is Kelly talking. He told me that when Trump raised the subject of German generals, Kelly responded by asking, "Do you mean Bismarck's generals?" He went on, "I mean, I know he didn't know who Bismarck was or about the Franco-Prussian War." I said, "Do you mean the Kaiser's generals? Surely you can't mean Hitler's generals." And he said, yeah, Hitler's generals. Now, our Jim Sciutto, Mark, you may remember in his book when he spoke to John Kelly, and John Kelly has shared other comments like this from Trump. So, this is coming now 2 weeks before the election. But in his book, Jim Sciutto reported that Kelly told him Trump privately said Hitler, quote, did some good things. So the question is, Mark, do you think something like this with some of these people in the middle who maybe the Nikki Haley voters, as Margaret just said, perhaps, that this could be damaging for Trump at this 11th hour?
I don't really. And I mean, obviously, John Kelly has said a lot of things about President Trump over the years. A lot of those have been disproven and pushed back on by a number of different people who were in the room. A lot of the things that are coming out in this story tonight are being pushed back on from the chief of staff at the White House, the Pentagon chief of staff, and as you pointed out earlier, the victim's sister, who pushed back against this reporting. So I think it falls into, just more clutter 2 weeks from an election. If you're still undecided in this election right now, and if that's 3, 4, 5%, I think it's because you wanted Kamala Harris to give you a reason to vote for her. She can't do it. She's not going to tell you how she's going to lower the gas and grocery prices that she caused to go up, or seal the immigration at the border that she opened up. All of these things, she hasn't answered the question, which is why you're undecided. And you get the opposite with Trump.